We're about to go live, ladies and gentlemen. Morning. I would like to welcome everyone to this meeting of the Joint Waste Disposal Board. Please note that the meeting is being recorded and broadcast. The board is together at Wokingham Borough Council, with some officers will be joining us online. Firstly, are there any apologies?
I have received apologies from Councillor Harrison.
You can see from the video feed that all members expected are present from the room. Do you want to go round? Because it is our first time together, isn't it, really? And I'm Dorothy Hayes, Councillor Mrs. Hayes, and I'm Bracknell Forest Borough Council Executive Member for the Environment. Yeah.
Ian Shenton, Wokingham Borough Council, Executive Member, Environment, Sport and Leisure.
And
Clive Jones, Wokingham Borough Council and Leader of the Council.
Richard Bissett, Wokingham Borough Council, Lead Specialist.
Rory Bryan, General Manager for FCC Environment, is the waste contractor for the RE3 partnership.
Karen Rowland, Lead Member for Environmental Services at Reading Borough Council.
And Councillor Tony Page, Deputy Leader Reading and Lead Member for Climate Strategy and Transport. And also Vice Chair, I think, still.
Andy Edwards, Reading Borough Council, Assistant Director, Environmental and Commercial Services.
Callum Wernham, Democratic Services, Wokingham Borough Council.
Damien James, Assistant Director for Contract Services at Bracknell Forest Council.
Oliver Burt, managing the contract for the three councils.
thank you, ladies and gentlemen. And needless to say, we can see who is with us as well on the screen. I shan't go to those for the time. It's nice to see that they are there. Okay, right. The full text for declaration of interest is set out on the agenda at item 2. If any member has a disclosed pecuniary interest or any affected interest to declare, please indicate and I will come to you in turn. Looks as if you're all great, right? Thank you. There are no declarations, but may I remind everyone that you can make a declaration at any time should it occur to you at a later point. Anyone declaring a disclosed pecuniary interest will need to leave the meeting when we get to that relevant part, okay? Right. The next agenda item is to approve as a correct record. I think we're on, it should be on number 3, page 5 to 8. The agenda item is to approve as a correct record the minutes of the meeting of the board held on, and we had that was, well, it was the 3rd of March. We had, even though we couldn't make the 7th of July. Please indicate if you have an issue with the accuracy. You're all happy? Can I take it then? If I move it, you're in with that? Yeah, okay. Nobody has indicated they have any issues, therefore I take those as agreed. Are there any matters arising from the minutes? Well, as you note, I'd just bring to attention, of course, we will be discussing later the issues of the two, the letter that I did discuss with Tony, the matter of the 2 issues, wasn't it? It was the waste and the booking system, which is in the presentation for it now. Nobody has indicated there's any issues. I'll take those as agreed. Are there any other matters arising? No. The next item, item 4. Is there any urgent items of business, Hannah?
No, none notified, Chair.
Good. Right, we're moving on very well there. Now, agenda item 5, well, last time was that I was going to do a whole long speech of an introduction by the chairman, but I feel that after last meeting, we were able to talk after, and I really do feel that I did have something going on saying how successful we'd been and the rest of it. I'll send it around to you all. Because I do think it's nice to see us have brought those few things that we've done in the past on publicity and different things, the success that the 3 councils have had over the years together. And I hope this is going to procure and go on with us all together, okay? But I will bring that up after. Then agenda item 5 is RE3's report and presentation, and we're going to go to Oliver. You ready for the report, Oliver? There you go.
Thank you, Chairman. I'm going to hand over to Jane in a moment, who will be sharing her screen with us. And then, members, we're going to have presentations. Rory Bryan's here from our contractor. Rory and Jane are going to take us through 3 important and kind of emerging areas of interest. So we're going to give some information on social value through the contract, which is a really important aspect of how councils and government measure the value of the money they spend. Jane's going to give us an update on climate change calculations, and then we'll come back to Rory to discuss some interesting findings from a recent waste composition analysis. So Jane's shared her screen. I'm going to hand over to Jane and Rory now, Chairman.
Okay, thank you very much. So Jane is going to be controlling the IT, hopefully. So I'll just wait for that presentation to come back on screen, and then I'll start to talk you through it. Okay, there we go. So as Oliver kindly introduced, first thing I want to talk about is social value, which I'm sure is a subject that you're all very familiar with and something that's quite important moving forward. So what I wanted to talk through is about how the contractor, FCC Environment, have been delivering social value through the contract over the last year and how we're going to be calculating that. So what I want to talk about firstly is a partnership with a company called Thrive. And Thrive is basically a software platform which enables people to, or companies to, input the values that they're delivering within the community. It links back to government social value models, which is how social value is accounted for when letting contracts. And then it links through what was called the impact evaluation standard, which basically takes a list of activities that have a significant impact in the communities, either socially, economically, or environmentally. And what this does then, it links it back to metrics, which are all government based, which then give that element of what you've done or that activity an actual physical value in terms of social value. As I say, it links back to the government metrics. It's fully auditable. So what values it delivers are accurate, and it's not just someone sticking their finger in the air saying, oh, we think it's £50 or £100 or £200. It all links back to those government metrics. So there's 122 metrics that it links to, and they're split into various categories, which are listed below. So particularly COVID-19 recovery, equal opportunities, economic equality, and climate change and well-being. So Jane, if you could go to the next slide, please. So what have we done? As I said, we've invested in Thrive software. So at the time of writing this presentation, we're the only waste management company to do that. And what we've done is we've taken those 122 metrics and we've whittled that down, and we've defined what we believe are the top 25 metrics that impact our partnership with the 3 councils, and then divided that into the subcategories. And then we've calculated the social value from there on. So just to give you some kind of background to what those categories are. So category 1, the tackling economic inequality. This is about creating job opportunities. So not just the fact that we employ 110 people locally, it's about what new positions can we create. And things like one of the FCC's policies is that if anyone applies for a job, they have to have a CV. So in the recent recruitment campaign, we had 4 people who applied who didn't have CVs. So we actually sat with them, wrote CVs for them, so that they can then obviously use that for applying for work for us, but equally they can then take that back into the community and use it to apply for other work. We then looked at increasing supply chain resilience, and that's very much about the money that we spend locally. So with local organisations, local companies. And again, the government define what's local, and they define it as 40 miles from the boundary of the area you work. So 40 miles from the RE3 boundary, but suggest that you can use an average of 20 miles, which is what we've done. And the basis being that those local organisations spend money within your communities and their staff do. There's then an area about fighting climate change, again, a very important area. And this is about some of the specific environmental training that we deliver to our staff. some of the works that we do in the community and our work towards the net zero. So how we impact in that net zero target. And then the well-being, again, is about engaging with higher education facilities, schools, which unfortunately due to COVID, we had to suspend some of the physical tours on site. But hopefully they'll be now starting to happen again. But also this is more about the community donations. So the work that we do with Sue Ryder in terms of reuse and the money that gets donated to Sue Ryder. And again, for every pound that gets donated to them, there's a government metric that converts that into a physical value of what that's worth in the community. So what we've done, we've calculated the 2021 social value delivered in RE3, and it's the direct social value by our operations within the RE3 areas. So it doesn't take into account things like the second tier parts of FCC, so the likes of the composting facility and the landfill, because each one of those is delivering social value as well. And what we've also done is we've commenced the 2022 reporting, but as of April, there's some more metrics that have been introduced, which is good, obviously. So we're just now working through those and seeing how do they impact the operations and what value do they deliver. So moving on to the next slide, please. So if you remember the four headings there, those were the four headings that we'd split down to, and this is for 2021 only. And then for the next animation that will come up now gives the actual physical values that were delivered last year in the 12-month. So what you can see there is a total there of just shy of £19 million worth of social value was delivered within 2021 through FCC's activities as part of the partnership. So each one of those categories, you see category 1 there, which was about the inequality and creating job opportunities. Again, you know, there's £270,000 worth there. The big one, the increase in supply chain resistance, which basically for every pound that you spend with a local company, the government metric states that actually equates to, I think it's £2.24 worth of social value based on their activities and their staff's activities within the local area. We then have for the fighting climate change, so the environmental initiatives, the training, everything that we deliver, that's delivered £1 million. And then for the largely number 4, that's pretty much the donations that we're giving to Sue Ryder. Again, that converts into a monetary value, and it's between £4 and £6 for every pound that gets donated, and that's created just shy of £41,000. So I think those numbers are big. You know, and actually, when we first looked at calculating this, we was pretty much unsure of what numbers would be. And we hear a lot of other companies kind of saying certain figures which maybe aren't fully auditable or traceable back to government metrics. And that was a big thing with this platform that we chose, was we wanted to calculate that social value, but for it to have some meaning and it to be real. So moving on to the next one. So taking that £19 million, so what that done in 2021, that represented 64% of the spend the council spent with FCC Environment. They got a return in social value. So obviously for us as a business, you know, we've had significant investment and significant money spent with local organisations and businesses. We invest in our people and our local people. And as I mentioned earlier, we employ around about 110 people across the partnership. And all bar, I think, 5 of those, unfortunately, I put my hands up, I'm one of those, do not live within the RE3 area. So you know, there's a lot of local people, local job opportunities. They're spending their money, you know, the taxes, their general groceries, all spending within the local area. We're working with local charities. So at the moment, we're working with Sue Ryder, you know, and they get money from the sale of reuse items. And again, we're hoping to expand on doing more reuse pop-up shops so that there'll be more value delivered to them and show you that it's a real number. So hopefully that's been of interest to you. And obviously, we're going to continue calculating as we go forward now. We'll constantly review the government metrics for any that are relevant to the partnership and include those within that. And then what I will be doing is with Oliver, we'll develop a format for presenting this to you on a basis that was, you know, maybe a quarterly basis, just to demonstrate what's been delivered within the partnership. But that's finished for that, and I'll I can see there's an eager question coming.
Yes, I'm really pleased with the figures on that. I'll start the questions. First of all, the pop-up shop. Have we thought of anything permanently on both sites? Because I have visited a site elsewhere, which I will talk to you about and show you pictures at some stage of what's happening. Is there any possibility of that?
So we have historically, there was a project that FCC looked at with Oliver and his team regarding a permanent shop. I think at that point in time, there were some reasons why it wouldn't quite work out. It's something that Oliver and I have spoke about recently, and it's a project that we're going to review again and see if that's something that we can do. I think in the meantime, we're looking to do more of these pop-up shops as a bit of a substitute, and obviously we're continuing our work with Sue Ryder and local companies like Precycle, so that we're still capturing that reuse, and it's still being reused. But yeah, it's certainly a project that we will be reviewing.
One more before I open up onto the floor is, you mentioned the word bikes. Are we getting quite a few? Because when I visited or just turned up at Longshot just to see what's going down and happening, I note the bikes on the side. Can you just leave it for the new members what is there as well?
Yes, so we do get quite a number of bicycles, in particularly children's bicycles, because I think obviously children use them, they grow out of them quite quick, and they're reasonably unused. So we do collect those that are serviceable. We work with Precycle, a local organisation that takes them. Sue Ryder also take them. And what we do a safety check. So our staff are trained to do a safety check on the bicycle to make sure everything is all there. That then they fill in a form. Sue Ryder come and collect it. They then check that form, make sure it is the bike, make sure it's safe, and then they take that off then, and that gets either any potential minor works get done to it, or it can get sold in their shop. At the reuse pop-up event, we had several bikes which sold very quickly, particularly adults bikes, because I think at the time we'd done the last pop-up shop, there was a bit of a shortage of bikes in the likes of Halford, so they sold really well. So bikes is a good item of reuse and has a demand and a value. So yeah, we are working to ensure that we have more outlets for those as well.
Yes, could you?
Yeah, well, I would just add for the benefit of the new members and everyone really, at a recent meeting, we agreed a kind of sort of process really for any charities that members or the councils may have awareness of in the local area, just to satisfy a few criteria, very simple criteria. We'll do the checking, but we obviously want to know that they're going to make sure that the bike is passed on to someone, ideally locally, but we want the bike to be in good working order. But basically, if there are groups around, know that you're aware.
I was just going to bring, this is what
Yeah.
I was going to go into, because it's something I'd like us members to consider in the future. Within our own councils, the word carers and children in care, the feasibility of maybe we can utilise some of this possibility of the bikes and that. Just something to start thinking about, if we don't mind. Now, any other questions to our Rory that you can think of? Yes, I can see that. No? Yes. Go ahead.
I just would like to know whether RE3 Grow, the scheme of giving out the compost to institutions, organisations, actually contributes to these figures.
So it's not within these figures because the scheme has only just started. So there are some new metrics that have been included within the Thrive platform, which should capture the value delivered by that compost. We're just currently working through to see which one best fits, because some of the metrics, although quite a few of them have a monetary value, so you can convert, X amount of bags equals this much social value. Some of the metrics don't have an actual physical value. So you can log it, you can say we've done this work, but it might not drive an actual number. So we're just at the moment reviewing these new metrics, but we believe there is one that will capture that new initiative.
Yes, Karen.
Thank you, Chair. I was very interested in the tackling inequality and the work that you've done with the job searches and things like that. And could you maybe address any future thoughts or anything like that that you've got to possible expansion in that area? Because I think it's something very important and something certainly that Reading Borough Council is driving towards. So any thoughts to that would be appreciated.
Yeah, I think what would be probably good is obviously as we continue to report on this, it might be worth us sitting down and discussing with the relevant people exactly what it is you're looking for, what we can deliver, how we can work together on that, and how that would then feed into this. But yeah, we're certainly interested in looking at that with you.
Chairman, I think that's a really good point. That's one of the whole purposes of measuring this is, and as Rory says, to come back. And I think if there can be that two-way conversation, what specifically would help? Now we're measuring this, it's natural. It's a natural thought process, or at least it's something that we want to be a natural thought process for us to try and focus on those areas where we can increase social value, not just almost retrospectively report what we've done. We want to look forward to what we can do, which will increase that value even more in the local area. We know that money is going to be spent in some way. How can we process stuff more locally? How can we improve the opportunities for people to work locally, those sorts of things? And I think it's that thought process that really comes from the measurement. So I think that's a really good idea, and any conversations we can have across all three councils really would be a good idea.
It's giving back. People think waste and rubbish. No, it's usefulness again, and being able to, as a team, working that way. I really think that it'll be really nice to sit down and do that. Any other questions?
Thank you, Chair. Can I just ask about your climate change element and whether the CO2 figures are included in the next section of the report? Fine. Okay, thank you.
Just to add to that, there is a section within the social value that relates to climate change. So we haven't included within that the CO2 figures because that metric is not quite clear on how that flows through. However, what you are able to include in that is, let's say, the environmental training that's been provided to staff to help minimise environmental impacts. And also you can include an element of landfill diversion above and beyond the targets that you're set. So if you were set, for example, a 85% diversion target and you diverted 90%, you can use that additional 5%, you can convert that into tons, and that can feed into that. But you couldn't just say we've diverted all 95%, that all fits into there, because that's basically the roles. But that, again, that will be something that evolves further as we go on.
Thank you. I'm aware that Oliver said that we're going to be discussing it further as well. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, any other questions? No, then thank you for that, Rory. It was very good. And no doubt, if anyone wants the slides or such, you can make that. Yes, could you? Yeah, please share it out for me. Thank you very much. So if we can move and agree the recommendation on page 9.
Before we go on, sorry that there were 3 parts.
Oh,
James, and then we'll be back to Rory very quickly.
Oh, right.
This first slide here. Oh, excuse me, sorry. This first slide here, the blue line is showing the CO2 emissions over the last 7 years from waste, and the black line is from waste plus freight, diesel, and gas, sort of fuel. So as you can see, it's half what it was, nearly a third of what it was. Up in 2015-16, it was about 24 million. Now it's gone down to 9.6 million. So some great progress there. I'll talk you through some of these kinks. So in 17-18 and in 19-20, the partnership were able to send significant amounts to EFW. Unfortunately, that sort of like tightened. And actually, because we've got the food waste anyway, we haven't got the residual waste to sort of deliver those levels anyway. But basically, the red line's a landfill. So you can see landfill is a significant part of that, and the landfill reduction over the 7 years. And then we've got the reason why it's going down, 1920, we've got food waste coming on board for Wokingham, and then Bracknell and Reading coming a year later. So you can see, 2 years later, sorry, 2020, the beginning of the end of 2021, beginning of 21-22. So each type of waste over those years. If we look at the green section, so total waste, the CO2 emissions, the average was 115 kilograms of CO2 emissions, and now last year it's gone down to 43.82, which is great average. And residual waste has gone down as well by a significant level. It's at 185.88 to 74.4. As you can see on here, landfill is the big one with those CO2 emissions. Any household waste going to landfill gives the biggest CO2 emissions. Pass-through costs and street sweepings, although they're sort of relatively high, they are a low percentage. So yes, some of street sweepings goes to landfill, which is what's bringing that up in there, but some of it is as much as possible is recycled, and some of it composted, and a little bit evaporates because there's quite a lot of water in there. Pass-through costs are things like asbestos, paint, clinical waste, etc. So they're going to sort of have a high value. Although if you look at them individually, like asbestos, if you put that in landfill, it actually has got quite a low CO2 emissions because it's not going to do anything once it's in there. So it depends on the material really with that one. Going up then, energy recovery has got a sort of high CO2 emission, not comparable to landfill, and they just go up basically. So recycling is good, compost is better, and so is food waste, and then beneficial waste, which is soil and hardcore, has got a very low CO2 emission. So this slide here just shows you the mix of waste and what's happened over the last 7 years, sort of, which is linked to what I've just described. And here you can see clearly you can see the introduction of food waste in the last 3 years, initially just Wokingham, and then all 3 councils are fully on board, 21-22. There's the impact that that's had on EFW and landfill. Okay, so we've had really good results with the food waste coming on board, and we over the 7 years sort of diverting from landfill and the waste coming down. But it's what can we do next is the big question really. So there's 2 things we could possibly do. One is contaminants. We've got quite a high value of contaminants still coming in the recycling. Last year it was 26% of the recyclates. So therefore, what happens with that? Like say it's at long shot, you've got it'll come into long shot instead of going straight to EFW if it was in the right bin. It then travels to Reading, so you've got the travel cost there and the fuel, and then it's processed in the MRF and then ends up in EFW. So sort of there's an additional cost there, additional fuel usage, and yeah, it could be recycled, and there's obviously like loss of income further down the line as well of it not being recycled. So contamination is one, and then the other one is residual waste. The next section that Rory's actually going to go into in a second is what's still in the residual waste. He's got some waste composition. So it's basically making sure that people put things in the right bin. There's still a lot in the residual waste that actually should be in food, compost, and yeah, recycling. So, okay.
Thank you, Jane. I'll open you on to the floor. Any questions, ladies and gentlemen? One to you, Jane, from me. Just something that I know some of the officers know. At the distance we take the food waste, you mentioned just now, is Oxford. Have we had, or I know I am, keen on looking at maybe our own AD? Has anyone had this thought?
Yes, it's one of the things that struck me, that we're tracking huge quantities now of food waste, and I think that certainly there is an option for trying to find something closer, if not very local.
If not ourselves. Exactly. So very something around that way. Good. Anyone else? Jane, that's you out the way, or do you want to carry on?
No, that's well, I was passed over to Rory, if that's okay. Back to Rory. To do that. Or have we finished? Do you want me? Nothing else on climate change?
Thank you very. You can go if you want to, but not out of sight if we need you.
No.
Okay, thank you, Jane. Yeah, you could bring us on to the next slide, please. Yeah, so as Jane mentioned, what I want to talk to you about now is a recent piece of work which was undertaken, which was basically waste composition analysis. It sounds very fancy. It was basically sorting through the waste that was delivered by the councils and telling us what is contained within. So if we go to the next slide, please. So yeah, what would the councils historically have undertaken waste sampling before, which the idea being that you can't physically sample every ton of waste that the councils collect and bring in. So it's how do we get a representative sample? So we worked with a company called Soccertech, who took some piece of work that had been done by previous waste composition analysis, which basically aims to cover the demographics of the three councils. So there's selected routes and selected streets and houses, which combined together give a representative sample of what the waste is out within the three facility where it was separated and the samples were taken. And as the picture shows there, that the waste was physically sorted into 27 different categories. And the idea being that it's separated into all the various different streams that could either be collected from the curbside as recycling or delivered to the recycling centres, and basically tell us exactly what was in that waste, where it came from, what the consoles, and then apply those percentages and weights to that waste flow forecast. Now, obviously, I caveat this with this is the most representative way that we can do the waste sampling without physically sampling every single ton. So it's some very simple mathematics in terms of taking the overall sample percentages and then applying those to the overall numbers. And then what we've been able to do from that is identify the tons of materials that are within the residual waste that should and shouldn't be there. And then we're able to, further on the presentation, I can attribute the values to those wastes and the costs for the councils. So if we go on to the next slide, please. So what this is telling us, you'll recognise that number there, 68,798 tonnes. That is the waste flow forecast that is being predicted that the councils will combined deliver of curbside residual waste to the transfer facilities. So by applying the data from the representative samples, what we're able to say is that within that, nearly 32%, so just shy of 30,000 tonnes, is recyclate material. So that's mainly your curbside recyclates, paper, card, glass, etc., along with some wood and textile. So basically, that's anything that could either be collected at the curbside or delivered to the recycling centres. We're then saying that within that, there's 22% of food waste still within those bins. And again, you know, each area is different, each demographic is different, but this is an overall sample. On top of that, there's a further 5,000 tonnes of green waste, which could be collected at either the curbside or delivered to the recycling centre. So in all, by applying this representative sampling and these maths, what we're saying is out of that 69,000 tonnes, 62% of it should not actually be within the residual waste. So if everything was extracted and either recycled at the curbside or taken to the recycling centres, actually there would only be around about 26,000 tonnes of residual waste out there. Now, obviously, that means capturing absolutely everything. And what I'm not going to be able to do within this presentation is give you the silver bullet that gives you the answers on how to do all of this. But there's some food for thought here. So just moving on to the next slide. And I don't want to dwell on this too much, but this is just to give you a feel for some of the tonnages and the materials that are within there. So you can see at the bottom, the big hitters, again, you know, the food waste. But, you know, if you look at the top there, you know, the amount of paper and cardboard that is still within the residual waste, you know, the amount of glass bottles, textile, there's some big numbers there, big tonnage of recyclates. And equally, each one of those recyclates has a value. So not only are you paying for it to be disposed of, it could be collected separately and sold. So moving on to the next one, which is probably the most interesting one. This one details the actual financials behind that. So what we're saying is that actually, if by chance we were able to get the residents to put absolutely everything in the correct container, so all the recyclables in the correct container, or take it to the recycling centres, and that was collected as recyclable material or delivered to the recycling centres, there would be a saving there, a disposal saving to the councils of £1.453 million. We then added that further in terms of the wood material that's within there. Again, if that was then collected by the residents and brought to the recycling centre, there's a £53,000 disposal saving. These numbers don't include any potential collection-based savings. This is just solely through the waste contract partnership. We then say, well, actually, the garden waste tonnage, again, if that was collected at either the curbside or brought into the recycling centres, there's another £254,000 worth of savings. And the food waste, again, which is the big tonnage, there's £1.5 million worth of savings there on food waste if that can be extracted from the containers. So in total there, what we're saying is that the disposal savings is £3.3 million potentially per annum of disposal savings. We then took those recyclates from the tonnages that you saw on the previous page and we applied today's sale values to them. Now, obviously, the materials markets can go up and down. At the moment, they are reasonably buoyant, so the prices are good. But of course, as we've seen sort of 2.5, 3 years ago, prior to COVID, some of the materials were very low in price. But at today's prices, you've got just short of £1.7 million worth of revenue that the council could be receiving for the sale of those materials. Again, if the markets were bad and that was zero, you still got the £3.3 million worth of disposal savings. So what we're showing there is that there's a potential £5 million per annum of value within the residual waste. So quite big numbers, quite sobering numbers. I'm sure you'll think. So moving on to the next slide, and as again, I caveat this with, I can't offer you the solutions here, but I think what this gives the opportunities of the councils and for FCC, the contractor, is to have a look at what can be done, to get that material in the correct containers. So the information that we've produced, what I've just given you here is a summary. We have lots of data that sits behind that which we'll be able to provide to the councils and the collection departments, which shows specifically which areas the higher volumes come from, which should enable the councils to maybe do some targeted comms campaigns and targeted education, and working with those collection authority and the collection teams to try and find out how can we tackle those particular areas. How can we make comms easier for residents? I think that's a big one. And something I had a quick look on the RE3 website, and it's fantastic in terms of the amount of information that's on there. You'll find whatever you want, but I wonder if it's as visual as it could be. So I think I'd like to, what can FCC do? I think we'd certainly like to work with the councils in developing that to make it a little bit more jazzy, a little bit more user friendly, perhaps. Obviously, we can provide the information that's needed, and of course, if you're able to collect more recyclates, we can certainly find a sustainable outlet for all of those. But I think the ultimate here is this was kind of just a bit of this is what's out there. There's some work that we can collectively look at, but I think unfortunately for us as the waste contractor, we can only deal with what comes into the facility. So once it reaches us, it's kind of too late at that point. So what can we do to get that in the correct containers, or get the members of public to bring it to the recycling centre? And there's quite a big pot to aim at there. So that was all for me. Obviously, any questions, and I'm sure there's some. I can see lots of rustling of papers. But yeah, anything you'd like to add?
Chairman, I'd just add, I mean, this isn't meant to be anything other than, as Rory says, a real positive sort of aspirational target. We recognise that the refuse collection services are not going to get 100% of this waste. That would just be beyond our reach. And in the past, when we've looked at these, we've always hedged it and said, well, if you could get 60 or if you could get 70 or so on and so forth. We haven't done that on this occasion because actually those numbers are quite inspiring, or I hope they're quite inspiring. But that's really the point. It's sort of what is the art of the possible, I suppose, really. How much of that value can we realise through that partnership and the coherence between the two sets of services, the collection on one side and the very council specific services, and then the shared service at the level that Rory and I work at and the board represents. What can we then do with it? And you've seen both of those aspects represented here.
Thank you, Oliver. It's not a pun, but the word food for thought, isn't it? Now we've started the food thing, we can see the benefits of the financial thing that we could make for our councils, our residents. It's something we get round the table and start thinking about this seriously. And I know we do seriously, but this is something I do think, because when you look at 3.3 million that we could be bringing back in. Anyhow, may I open it out to the floor? Any questions to Rory, or just an excellent paper? Oh, yes. Oh, Karen.
Thank you. It's definitely very interesting and very aspirational, but and I think it leaves a lot of opportunity. I mean, you can sit down there and look at this chart and see all kinds of different opportunities. But when dealing with the public and you're trying to promote a certain thing, such as reducing the foil or making a case for that, just to use an example, you start dealing with too many messages and too much messaging. So are there any examples elsewhere of how you get that messaging working better? I know you were kind of talking about graphics. Was that part of it, or are there any ideas about that? Because there are many things that we could do, but too many messages, yeah.
Yeah, and I think the purpose of the presentation was and the data that we can provide is to highlight what are the big hitters. So as you say, yeah, you wouldn't want a message for every single recycling stream, because then the public become overwhelmed and they're not really going to pay any attention. So if we looked at things, as you say, the chair mentioned the food waste. There's a big number there, cardboard and stuff. And I think what it's important and what the data can tell us is we can actually target those comms to specific areas. So we don't necessarily have to do a blanket RE3 campaign of food waste or plastics or cans. We can help you and give you the information to tailor that to certain areas, so that if you are running multiple messages, you could target a certain area or certain demographic. I think, as I said, and you've alluded, there's probably no magic answer to this. What I'm working on at the moment is FCC do a number of waste collections up and down the country. So I'm asking my colleagues for anything we've done elsewhere that has been successful or not, so that we can provide that information to the council, so that you can either learn from campaigns elsewhere that have worked or not worked. But I think that the big thing is going to be, how do you educate the public? As Olive said, getting 100% of it, that's probably not likely. But if we can start chipping off at some of those bigger numbers, target those specific areas and specific materials, I think that would help quite considerably.
Just on that, Karen, last month, and it was at the beginning, we had our senior schools. We asked them to send a group of their environmental students, and they all met together, 8 schools, and the ideas coming out, it was enthralling just to get. They even came up and said, well, we'll just target one thing and go for it. And one of the biggest parts was they themselves admitted that they had problems with what went in the bins, and they came up from our idea of the wheel. They were making those as well, and it's targeting certain things and see whether we can get the manufacturers on board with us. But there's no harm in doing it. Ian, you wanted to come in? Sorry.
Yes, I think you mentioned that you sorted into 27 different categories, and there aren't quite 27 in the table in the agenda. So I just wondered if you had any further breakdown, because I'm curious that Wokingham seems to be significantly greater than Reading and Bracknell in what is classified as other.
Okay,
I'd just like to know what it is.
Yeah, so we can provide the data. So what we've done is we split it into the categories of what is currently collected at the curbside or the recycling centres. We also then done some work on what we think could be potential new streams coming on board. So the things like the films, the flexible plastics and rigid plastics and things like that. And we also calculated the amount of nappies and within there as well. So yeah, you won't see the full 27 there. We've kind of got that information for what could be coming in the future, so that we've got an idea. So if when we get some clarity on the recent consultations on consistent collections, and we believe that things like film and flexi plastics will be included, we kind of know what we're expecting to collect from the curbside and what the potential value is there as well. So again, all that information can be provided.
Okay, thank you, because it's nearly 30% of our waste, according to that, is just other. It'd be interesting to break that down further if we can.
If you could supply that, Rory. Okay.
Chairman, a couple of things. Yeah, we definitely will supply that information. And we've got a session with all the officers. The officers have already seen this in sort of aggregate, and we've got a session with the officers next Friday to go through it in more detail. So that's that thing. And I think there's another point, I suppose, really, actually, we did some work recently where we worked out, I think the sampling has been done on 27 categories. There are actually 62 specific individual categories that we break waste down to through the contract. So that's going to separate places or different processes. I suppose that gives you a sense of the kind of that phrase granularity, but we're trying to put everything in its right place. The final point I just want to make, really, as a nice positive end on what is already a positive story, I suppose, is, and it goes to what Councillor Rowland was saying, really, is I would just be really confident about the council's capacity to message and to sort of get that momentum going behind the public, because you've already done it. In 2017, we introduced a wider range of plastics and people took that on board brilliantly. That's fantastic. We've done things like the windscreen stickers for getting access to the HWRCs way back. I saw one in the street the other day and I kind of, oh yeah, that was, we've managed to communicate with residents, and you've all done it recently. Each of the councils over the last 3 years has just introduced significant changes. And the reason that all 3 councils are at over 50% now is because of that capacity to communicate with people. What this says is, and I guess this goes to the point you're making, Councillor Rowland, is there's still more to be done. But really, I suppose we should look at the distance we've come so far rather than the distance we've got to go, perhaps in terms of being confident that we can do it. And I think if we work at both levels, if we work at the partnership level and at the individual level, in the individual councils, then we've really got a good chance. So enough of a sermon from me, but just a positive spin on that, I suppose.
Yeah, no, it's important, because with new members as well, I mean, we went from being the glass in separated containers, now it's all in one. And then the robot, I mean, that's another thing I'm sure the new members would like to see at Reading, if you haven't seen it. Our robot there, it's the progress that we are moving forward, and that's the positiveness we must keep on going with. Anyhow, any other questions on this particular paper? Yes, Rory.
Just wanted to add a couple of final things, picking up things like the robot and stuff like that. I think, it's safe to say my short period within RE3 coming up to those 2 years now, but being with FCC Environment for 10 years, I think this is a really exciting and forward-thinking partnership to be in. So actually the work that's been done by the councils to get us here is absolutely fantastic. And compared to some other local authorities, you're really far ahead on that road. So what the idea of presenting that was is just, what's the next stages? So thank you for the opportunity of presenting that.
Not at all, sir. Having said that, then, ladies and gentlemen, the recommendation that members note the contents of this report and accompanying presentation on page 9 can I take it that? Yep, and we can move on. Thank you very much. And Rory, I'm looking forward to us going forward, even though that something I will bring up here, we have to think of the contract. We've only a few years left, but I would think we're going to go into the future all together because we do work well together. Right, moving straight on to agenda item 6 is a report which you're going to give, Oliver. Please, would you like to present your report? And that is on in front of us now.
Thank you, Chairman. I'm going to hand over to Sarah in a moment to deal with most of the items, but I just will give a plug for 5.1 down to 5.3. We are preparing some member sessions, and I think it's for a group of members broader perhaps than you and anyone that you as board members would want to invite. I think we can do it. We certainly planned them to be per council. I guess if there are that might allow for more conversation and open questions if people, we want to kind of cover that interface between the collection systems and the partnership. So really what we'll do is we'll liaise with officers to set those up over the course of, I know there'll be a period where there are fewer people around while people taking holidays and stuff, but after this meeting and then perhaps before the next meeting in September, we'll try and get those sessions set up so you can invite broader range of members, and we'll go through in some detail what the contract does and some of the things that you've just been talking about, where it might go and so on and so forth. So that's enough from me, and I'll hand over to Sarah now to give you the performance update.
So as Oliver says, first section from me is our usual review of performance statistics. So you'll have seen in the report that we've presented the recycling rates for last year in comparison with the previous year. And as you would expect, all 3 councils have seen increases in their recycling rates. So 2 main reasons for that. So the first one is obviously the changes that were made at the curbside by all 3 councils, which I've referred to in the report. But the second thing is essentially we've compared the first year of the pandemic with the second year of the pandemic. And again, as you would expect, we've seen a bit more waste coming to the recycling centres. So obviously where that waste is recyclable waste, that has a positive impact on the overall recycling rate. But we've also seen more residual waste coming to the recycling centres. And it looks like a lot of that might previously have been collected at the curbside. So obviously where there's a movement of residual waste from the curbside to the recycling centre, it doesn't have an impact on our overall recycling rate, but it does have an impact on the recycling rate of the recycling centres. And that's why you see the lower figures in the second table of the report. In the third table of the report that you've got, I've compared the performance from April of this year with Q1 of the previous year. But as I've said in the report, I think it's probably too early at this stage to use that data to draw conclusions about how performance for this year might play out. However, obviously, we've now got more data that we didn't have when this report was written. So I need to do a bit more analysis on that. And then obviously, once we've got some information on that, we'll obviously share that with you. Are there any questions on performance, or shall I move on to the next bit?
Any latest? No. Please continue.
Okay, so the next section then is about supermarket recycling, essentially. So historically, we've reported data from supermarket recycling towards the council's recycling rate. However, it has recently been identified that the paper, card, tins and the plastics are no longer being recycled. So as a result of that, we are proposing to no longer record the Sainsbury's data towards the council's recycling rates, just to make sure that residents are aware of the separation between the council services, where obviously those materials are recycled, and the supermarket collections where they're currently not being recycled. So yes, if members are happy for us to proceed in that manner, we would also propose to put a note to that effect on the RE3 website.
Ladies and gentlemen, can we take that? Yeah, the recommend 2.2, the recommendation there. Yes. That's what I was going to. Thank you, Sarah.
Okay, so the next bit then is just about the community compost scheme. So members will obviously be aware that that launched in May of this year. In May, we had a total of 47 applications for just under 900 bags of compost. Members approved most of these applications, with the exception of a couple of schools that had applied and a couple of applications that appeared to be for personal use. So a lot of those groups will now have received their compost, and we've asked for some information back from those groups by the end of July, which hopefully we can then use ourselves to help promote recycling further. Unfortunately, the number of applications that we've received in June has dropped off quite significantly. So we only received 4 usable applications in June for the community compost. But I think Lauren will probably talk a bit later on in her communication section about plans to hopefully pick those numbers up a bit. Are there any questions on compost?
I'm sure Laurie will give us the details. Yeah. Okay.
Okay.
Sorry. No, we do have. I'm
Oh, sorry.
Leslie.
Yes. I know that schools were excluded because it was assumed that the number of applications would overwhelm the scale of the community service. But was that based upon any analysis of how many schools actually have gardening ability or gardening aspects that would use compost? Because presumably not every school would pile in and ask for some free compost. Because if we're having a situation where we've only got 4 applications in June, it kind of says, if we do it again, then maybe we should be looking at how many schools might potentially apply, and rather than exclude them, we could then perhaps categorize them, maybe particular one age group or something like that.
I'm glad you brought that up, Ian, because I actually went to a school after the question. I also and asked, did they have any someone that came in that they could put their names forward, even if it wasn't the school. And this particular school did have a voluntary persons coming in to do work within teaching the young persons. So it is something that we should be looking at, not verify the schools from not having it. Can you give us some more detail on that, Sarah? If there are bags, can we use them?
Yeah, well, we decided that we would exclude sort of schools, colleges, universities, etc., just because of the number of them that there are and the vast number of pupils that they obviously serve. And yeah, I suppose we didn't know how many would be likely to apply, how many of them have got outdoor spaces. But I suppose even if you haven't got an outdoor space, there is still the ability that you might have wanted compost to use, even if it's just planting seeds in pots and things. So yes, obviously we've not done this before and we didn't know what the uptake would be. But yes, obviously we've got a bit more learning now, and I'm sure if we were to do this in future, we could learn from that. So yes, currently of the 5,000 bags that we said that we would offer via the community scheme, we've got an awful lot that haven't yet been allocated. So yes, if you've got any more thoughts on that, please let us know.
It's probably too late for schools this year because they'll be very soon they'll be finishing. And but I think I'd certainly like to see some consideration given to schools, even if it's only one particular category of schools, if it, it's a certain age range in future.
We can take that for September because, as I said, having visited a school to ask that particular question, did they have a volunteer organisation that came in, and they said, yes, we have an volunteers. It was called the Ascot Wildlife Volunteers, and they were coming in, and they were bringing in, as I was standing there, I went to look at this particular area, and they were teaching the young children how to plant and different, and they were bringing in compost. So it could be that we could be having our RA3 bags. Yes, we'll take that on. Yes.
Do we have to wait till September to make the decision, or can we decide to do that now?
We could do that now, but
Chairman, all I say is I think if we've got spare bags, then we've got time between now and September. I think, as Councillor Shenton says, schools themselves are going to be closing down. But yeah, absolutely. And I think you're right. If that's the decision you want to make, then that's absolutely right. We can do that.
all in agreement to that? Yeah. Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Right, okay. So next point then is about rigid plastic. So the trial has continued to go well. The residents continue to make good use of the service, and our reprocessor continues to be happy with the quality of the material that we're sending. So there's still a bit of work to be done about making sure that the transport of the material is efficient as it can be. But we are confident at this stage that the cost of recycling the rigid plastics will remain below the cost of landfilling the same waste. And it is therefore our recommendation that members approve that the rigid plastic trial now becomes a permanent service at both sites.
That's recommendation 2.3, ladies and gentlemen, on your papers. Can I take it we're in agreement with that? Yes, thank you very much.
Okay, so the final point from me then is just a quick note on mixed glass. So this too has continued to go well. Obviously, there are fewer cases now where we get one full up bank sat next to other banks that are only partially full, and that reduces the number of overflows that we're seeing. And it also means that we're starting to be able to look at the collection schedules with FCC and optimize these schedules so that we're only collecting the glass at the frequency they actually need to be collected at. So both of these things have benefits in terms of cost. We're just noticing a few sites where residents aren't mixing their glass as much as perhaps we would like. So the plan is to add some bigger stickers at some of those sites. I think those have been ordered now, so hopefully those will be with us shortly. And then, yeah, we can get those on the banks to encourage everyone to mix their glass.
I'd appreciate that. We do have at Tesco's, the one in Warfield. I mean, it's a well-used one, extremely well-used. And particularly during lockdown, we had a large increase on brown bottles, ladies and gentlemen. But having said that, yes, the more we can improve, the better on that. Thank you, sir.
Okay, so that's me done for now, and I'll hand over to Lauren.
Hi everyone. So yeah, so the stickers have been ordered for the bigger mixed glass ones, but unfortunately my contact at the graphics design place is on holiday at the moment, so I'm just waiting to hear back from them. But they have been designed and mocked up, and hopefully they should be sent out as soon as she's back from annual leave. As Sarah said, we've had not that many applications for our regrow scheme in June. So I'm going to be liaising with Julie from FCC. She's sort of a communications specialist, to sort of see how we can get the scheme more broadly out into the public and hopefully get a few more applications. I'm also reaching out to each individual council to see if they can spread it a bit more internally within the councils to sort of reach the community groups of each area. We did receive our first sort of feedback information from a group called Twyford Growers, who used the bags with their Age UK groups. They used the compost to grow vegetables, which have now been harvested. So we received some really nice photos, which I've put out on social media yesterday, I believe, and that we can get up on the website, and hopefully we can make like sort of a little case book of all the nice things that come in that have been done with the free compost that we're giving out. I've started editing a video for RE3 about contamination, as that was also brought up earlier in the meeting. And during this video, I've sort of gone around the recycling centre and filmed big bits of contamination. And I filmed the staff at the MRF sort of taking out bits of contamination. It's just an informational video to sort of educate residents about what happens to the contamination when they put it in the recycling, how they can cut down, sort of what the most common items that we're finding are contaminating the recycling are, just so that they're aware. And it's just something a bit different instead of just like a, you know, your regular Facebook post or your regular newsletter, just something a bit more engaging and informative, hopefully, for residents. And sort of the last thing I have to talk about is we had a really big update to our Recyclopedia app at the end of May. So with the Recyclopedia app, there's now a barcode function. So you can scan an item, like a package of some sort, and the Recyclopedia will tell you what you need to do with it rather than having to input all the information. Unfortunately, I haven't started promoting this yet because the data that the Recyclopedia seems to be using isn't picking up all the postcodes in the RE3 area. So for example, when I put in my postcode, even though it's in the Reading Borough Council area, it sort of says that my postcode's not valid and won't let me search for anything. So I'm working with the app developers to hopefully get that sorted out, because I don't really want to promote the service yet whilst it's not going to be working for half of our residents. But hopefully that will be sorted soon and we can launch that app update. And that's all from me, really.
I'll just come in on that because the comes to mind, one picture can say 1,000 words. And one of the things that has always come is when we did the vegetables, how the children picked up on it. And it is important we get those messages out there. No doubt you will be communicating with each of the councils, not democratic, communication. And let's get this message out there. I mean, the more we can get the word out, the better. Okay. Anything before I close this down? Then, ladies and gentlemen, the recommendations we have gone through on page 15. Yes. Yeah.
Sorry, Dorothy. On page 15, paragraph 5.3, which I'm sure we all welcome, about the briefing sessions, which I know we would want to take up in Reading, and I'm sure the other two authorities would as well. Would this be ready to start from September? Because we're committed to having a further discussion with colleagues about the continuation of the booking system. I know we're coming on to this later, but I think it would be very helpful. I've not discussed this with Karen or Andy, but I think we're very helpful to have a presentation to members that could then roll that into
it. And that's why I think it would be important for us to have maybe the meeting in September at Longshot, so people can be visually aware of it.
Well, no, but Dorothy, no, I'm not talking about the meeting at Longshot. I'm talking about internal meetings within the authorities prior to that, which would indicate a meeting for us towards the end of September to allow us time for internal discussions.
Yeah.
And so what I'm asking for is, would officers be ready to go from early September so that we can then have those in-house meetings first prior to a board meeting towards the end of September? That would be...
Chairman, we can definitely do that.
I'll
liaise with Andy about getting dates for the Reading members, and obviously with each of the representatives,
Walking
Richard and so on and so
definitely.
forth, for each of the others. But I suppose what we'll need to do is just coordinate that with the setting of this next meeting. So I suppose when we come to look at your diaries later, we probably want to look for a meeting towards the end of September rather than give ourselves some time.
Yeah.
Good answer. Thank you. So then we'll move. Can we move on then? We're all in agreement to that. Thank you. Now, before we go on to 8 and 9, as you can appreciate, agenda items, they're likely to disclose or exempt information, so we will be moving to private section to discuss this item. May I therefore move such? Okay. Ladies and gentlemen, with the pursuant to regulations 4 of the local authorities, regulations 2012, and having regard to the public interest, members of the public and press be excluded from the meeting for the consideration of items 8 and 9, which involves the likely disclosure of exempt information under the following categories. Can I take that information relating to financial business? Is that seconded? Thank you, Karen. Thank you. Does any member oppose thus moving into the private sector? No. Then we'll move on. Having said that, then